Welcome to Wife Cheating Story. I hope you have an enjoyable and relaxing time listening. Let's get started.
My name is Rowan Hart. I'm 38 years old, I fix broken bits of code for a living, and I share a single-story rental on the outskirts of Flagstaff with my rescue mutt, Tucker. The desert pines stand sentinel beyond our fence, their needles whispering every morning as I pull on a stale sweatshirt and tie my hiking boots. I fill Tucker's bowl with kibble, scratch behind his ears, and shoulder out the door. No extravagant views. No thrill-seeking weekends. Just the steady rhythm of deadlines, dog walks, and the one event I've treated as my personal masterpiece every summer for the last 7 years, the Hart-Lorraine family barbecue. It began innocently enough. 7 summers ago, Leanne's cousin needed someone to mind the grill. "Spare me," she'd said. "You like cooking." So I showed up with charcoal, an Instagram dream of skewered shrimp, a half-price wireless speaker I'd agonized over for a week, and a smile wide enough to stretch from our rental's porch to the ranch gates. The family lounged, drank lemonade, and raved about my dry-rubbed ribs as, inside me, a spark ignited. I loved the praise, sure, but even more I loved the look on Leanne's face when I caught her eye and gave a triumphant nod. She beamed back, and I felt something more potent than ego. Something like belonging. Over the years, the annual event evolved into an unspoken pact. I became the griller-in-chief. I researched new rubs, swapped out disposable plates for enamelware, and shelled out for that Italian olive oil marinated potato salad recipe. I'd gather the cardboard box stash of assorted sodas, coordinate with her aunt on seating, and practice ambulance drills in my mind. What if it rained? What if the smoker balked? What if I burned the brisket? Then I let the small panic sharpen my focus into precision planning. Shopping lists perfected, grocery store scavengers charted, and careful savings deposited into a shifting barbecue fund. This year was supposed to top them all. I'd skipped streaming box sets I'd been promising myself, held off on a weekend camping trip, forewent a new pair of running shoes, also I could stash away extra for the party. I bought organic hardwood chunks for the smoker, and even splurged on a premium digital thermometer with a backlit display. And then I rounded the gesture off with the piece de resistance, a gleaming steel offset smoker for Leanne's parents, aged bronze finish, insulated handle, smoking shelves. It cost more than my phone bill, and I ordered it back in March, tracking its cross-country journey like a proud father awaiting a newborn. When the UPS truck finally rolled down our street, I hugged the crate so fiercely the neighbors might have thought I'd won the lottery. I didn't do it for applause. I did it for love, or maybe for illusion, the idea that grand gestures earn you credit in hearts you already hold dear. I imagined Leanne's mother gasping, "Oh, Rowan, you remembered," as she ran gloved fingers along the smoker's lid. I pictured her father handing me an aged bourbon from a hidden bar cart, thumping my shoulder in approval. I pictured laughter and long afternoons drifting like lazy smoke above the coals. At home, I spent Sunday sharpening knives and reorganizing my tool chest. I inventory-checked propane tanks, restocked lighter fluid, and polished the grill's grates until they gleamed under the overhead LED. The kitchen table groaned under grocery bags. A gallon of hickory-infused barbecue sauce, amber bottles of local craft beer, mason jars of seasoning blends. Tucker lay at my feet, head tilted, as if casting judgment on my single-minded obsession. I scratched behind his one floppy ear and said, "Trust me, but this time we're going big." Dinner was the usual frozen pizza crust warmed in the oven, diced salad thrown together like I'd lost interest halfway through, and a half-empty glass of Cabernet that tasted of obligation. I scrolled through photos from last year's party on my phone, string lights draped between aspens, cousins lounging in Adirondack chairs, the smoke curling in late-afternoon sunbeams. I paused on Leanne's face, tilted up in delight as she bit into a smoked sausage. That memory glowed with warmth and promise. I slid the phone into my pocket, rose, and paced the small living room. 7 years of orchestrating barbecues. 7 years of scrimping on myself to ensure their pleasure. 7 years of trusting that the smiles and cheers equaled real gratitude. Maybe even love returned in equal measure. My chest tightened with hope and a sneaking doubt. What if I'd been wrong all this time? I shook off the thought, telling myself it was the pre-event jitters. After all, I'd proven myself before. I'd never faltered. The cars would roll in on Friday afternoon. My in-laws would park in neat rows by the barn. Leanne would snake her arm through mine and whisper, "Thank you," just as she always did. And I'd smile like I owned the world, because for one perfect weekend, I did. I stood by the counter, staring at the array of spices laid out like soldiers awaiting orders. The earthy tang of cumin, the smoky whisper of paprika, the fierce heat of cayenne. I dipped a fingertip into the darkest blend, tasted it, and felt a thrill. This was more than cooking. This was my statement. I give, and I care. I cleared my throat, shrugged off my sweatshirt, and ran my hand through hair that had grown too long. I checked the time, 8:47 p.m. I still had 2 days to finalize everything. But in my mind, the race was already over. I had won. Outside, the wind rustled through the ponderosis, carrying the faint smell of juniper. Tucker padded to the door, tail wagging hopefully. I grabbed his leash and headed out for our nightly walk, every step echoing with the familiar promise. Come Friday, the Hart Lorraine barbecue would light up the ranch once more, and I would stand behind the grill, proud as any king. Until then, I would prepare and believe, because for 7 years, that belief was everything. And so I walked into the cool night, Tucker at my side, confident that the smoke I cultivated would veil us all in celebration. But somewhere beneath that confidence hovered a question I dared not voice. What if this year, they had other plans? I slid into the kitchen 3 days before the barbecue, my shirt smeared with the sweet, slick marinade I'd spent hours perfecting. The brisket lay in a deep glass dish on the counter, cut precisely into thick slabs, each one kissed with mustard, dry rub, and a final drizzle of honey-infused vinegar. I rubbed my palms together, cracked open a cold beer, and leaned in to inhale the complex aroma. The sharp tang of black pepper, the subtle warmth of smoked paprika, the faintest whisper of brown sugar caramel. My phone lay face down beside the sink, silent for now. Tomorrow it would ping with last-minute confirmations from her cousins, Annie's, and Uncle Frank. But tonight, for a moment, everything smelled right. I reached for the aluminum foil when I heard Leanne's soft knock at the doorway. She stood there with her phone in hand, her posture casual, her expression neutral. "Hey," she said, voice light as though she were announcing that the mail hadn't arrived. I wiped my hands on a towel and forced a grin. "What's up? Checking on the ribs?" She tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear and held up the phone. Kelsey texted, "They're not coming. Barbecue's off." I froze mid-reach, foil wrapper crinkling in my fist. Off. The word hit me like an unexpected chill. "They're what?" I managed, blinking twice to clear the disbelief. She shrugged, as if canceling a dentist appointment. "Kelsey says everyone's too broke to travel. No gas money, no lodging, nothing." My heart thudded so hard I could feel it in my temples. The ribs stared up at me, heavy with promise. I felt the air thicken around me, as though the kitchen itself recoiled. I set down the foil and folded my arms, the beer still cold in my free hand. "That's it?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. No outrage, no pleading, just a quiet incredulity. She nodded once, turned on her heel, and walked away. The screen door clicked behind her, and I stood alone, the scent of smoked paprika suddenly suffocating. I stared at the brisket, at the bottles of barbecue sauce lined up like soldiers waiting orders, at the half-assembled string lights hanging limply above the sink. It felt absurd. My phone buzzed with a notification, and I checked it reflexively. Dev, her cousin, typing. Bummer, man, maybe next year. I typed back an acknowledgement, the blunt, "Okay," and put the phone aside. I didn't text Leanne, didn't call Kelsey. I didn't want excuses or apologies. My cheeks burned not with anger, but with the sudden rawness of abandonment. I opened a drawer, pulled out a clean plate, and arranged 3 thick slices of brisket. I poured a generous pool of sauce over them and added a side of coleslaw in a smaller bowl. Tucker padded into the kitchen, tail wagging like a metronome, eyes bright and hopeful. I set a piece on the floor for him, then carried the plate to the dining table alone. Outside, the sun dipped behind the pines, painting the sky in shades of burnt orange, an accidental echo of the smoky rub. I ate in silence. The meat was tender, the sauce tangy. Yet each bite was laced with bitter aftertaste. I chewed methodically, counting the seconds between each forkful. Memories bubbled up unbidden. The first barbecue, when Leanne, wide-eyed and nervous, asked if I was proud, and I'd laughed so hard my ribs hurt. The second year, when she helped me angle the smoker just so, and we'd high-fived over the perfect bark on the brisket. The third year, when her grandmother praised my potato salad recipe and called me son. 7 years of this ritual, and now not a single soul would show. After dinner, I cleaned the dish, rinsed each container until the water ran clear, and stacked them in the rack. The kitchen was spotless again, as if I'd never staged a feast. I wiped down the counter and swept the floor, mechanically removing any trace of the plans I'd carefully laid. By the time I finished, the headlights outside flickered on, and a late truck rumbled past the house. I watched its red tail lights drift down the road, swallowed by the dusk. I returned to the brisket dish, the last scrap of meat clinging to the bottom. I scraped it into a bag, sealed it tight, and shoved it into the refrigerator. I fished out a quart of ice cream from the freezer, plopped it into a bowl, and settled onto the couch with Tucker stretched at my feet. On the coffee table, the TV remote sat next to a half-assembled six-pack. I clicked on a cooking show, the host's cheerful banter fighting the weight of silence in the room. I sipped my beer. Flat, lukewarm, and took a deep breath. The kitchen lights bounced off the empty walls like a mockery. Yet, as I ran a hand through Tucker's fur, I realized I wasn't furious. I wasn't shattered either. I was stunned, yes, but within the shock lay a curious clarity. All those years, I thought I was orchestrating a celebration of love, forging bonds, making memories. All I'd really been doing was paying. By bedtime, I texted Leanne once, "We need to talk." I left it simple. I didn't mention the ribs or the smoker. I just needed the conversation on my terms, not as an afterthought. Tucker curled up next to me on the mattress, our shared loyalty solid in the dim lamplight. I couldn't sleep. Images of the empty ranch flooded my mind. Tables set, chairs vacant, my sweat and sacrifice left to cool under a silent sky. Eventually, exhaustion claimed me, and I drifted into dreams where the smell of smoke faded into the cold air, leaving only the harsh scent of disappointment. Morning would come. I'd have to face the ruined weekend, the missing family, the broken ritual. But in that moment, as the house settled around us, I understood something essential. A party is only as real as the people who show up. And this time, they didn't. I woke to Tucker licking my hand, eager for breakfast, oblivious to social slights or family grudges. Outside, the pine needles rattled in a whispering wind. The sun cast long rays across the floorboards, and for the first time since I started planning, I felt unbound by obligation. The barbecue was off. The guests were gone. But Tucker was here, and the day was mine. I rose, stretched, and tapped a finger against my phone. "Let's see," I mumbled, "what happened to my party?" And with that, I stepped into chapter 2 of a weekend I never meant to spend alone, ready to find out if the truth tasted any sweeter than that brisket had. That night I settled onto the couch with Tucker draped over my feet, the glow of the TV casting lazy shadows across the living room. I flipped through channels aimlessly, sports, cooking shows, even late-night infomercials promising gadgets I was too tired to buy. Tucker's soft snores were the only sound until my phone buzzed on the coffee table. I swiveled, reached across the empty Coors Light cans, and unlocked the screen. "Kelsey has gone live," read the notification. My pulse jolted. Kelsey, Leanne's sister, the one who'd signed us up for every family group chat, the one who always took my half-hearted dad jokes in stride. I hadn't spoken to her since canceling the barbecue. Curiosity pried me off the couch. I tapped the notification and the grainy video began to load. For a moment all I saw was static, then the image snapped into focus, the sprawling expanse of her family ranch, bathed in string lights and flickering sparklers. There, in the center of the lawn, was my smoker. The same offset smoker I had meticulously chosen and shipped from halfway across the country. Its stainless steel body gleamed under multicolored bulbs, its chimney puffing thin plumes of smoke that drifted upward into the chilly night. My heart thumped so hard I could feel the vibration in my teeth. I leaned closer to my phone, propping it on the armrest. The scene widened. Tables were arranged in neat rows, draped with checkered cloths. Chairs circled them, each occupied. I scanned the crowd. Leanne's parents, sitting side by side with matching white cowboy hats, sipping something amber, probably bourbon. Her cousins perched on hay bales like it was the trendiest bar in town, laughing in bursts that floated across the screen. Luca, her brother, clapped his wife on the back as she swirled in a sundress. Even Julian, Leanne's ex-husband, no longer a footnote in my mind, stood by the fire pit, grinning and flipping burgers. I felt an electric twist in my gut. The smoke curled from the smoker's hotbox, enveloping racks of ribs I knew weren't mine this time. I swallowed and my throat went dry. The camera panned, handheld, as Kelsey stepped into view. She wore a sun hat and a grin that stretched ear to ear, drink in hand. Her voice crackled through my speakers. And here's to Rowan, who's done all the work but decided to stay home this year. She raised her plastic cup, and the crowd erupted in cheers. I watched them raise theirs, toasting someone absent, me, while they feasted on what I'd prepared. My mouth went numb. I recalled Leanne's casual dismissal just days ago. They're too broke to travel. My own words swirled in my head like bitter aftertaste, excuses, half-truths. Every sacrifice I'd made, every hour I'd spent devising menus and seating charts, every hard-earned dollar I set aside had gone to stock that party. And now the spoils were being consumed right before my eyes. I shut off the TV and rose from the couch, phone in hand like a hot coal. Tucker ambled after me, tail wagging uncertainly. I crossed the living room, bare feet slapping softly on the floorboards, and stood by the front window. I held my phone up to the glass, angling it so I could see the screen and the yard beyond simultaneously. Even behind the curtain, I could glimpse the pale light spilling across the patio chairs arranged in a semicircle. Chairs I'd cleaned and stacked after last year's party. I paced the room, glancing at Tucker, who cocked his head and studied me with inquisitive eyes. "You see that?" I whispered, voice tight. Tucker whined softly, as though acknowledging the injustice but unable to help. Frustration coiled in my chest. I had to decide, confront them right now, or let them dig this molehill deeper into the ground. My fingers hovered over Leanne's chat window. 1,000 possible messages formed. "Why did you lie to me? I watched you all eat my ribs. I'm done." But none of these felt precise enough. I needed more evidence. I sank onto the armchair, sliding my phone back to the same live scene. I watched the smoke swirl above the glowing embers, the way the ribbons of colored light reflected off metal serving trays. The party had a soundtrack, a beat-heavy playlist that reminded me of happier times when we danced barefooted on the grass. A burst of laughter cracked the calm. Kelsey had just told a joke I couldn't hear. I leaned in, adjusted the volume, but the distant crackle muddled the words. In the next scene, Leanne appeared, backlit by a stage of bistro bulbs. She turned toward the camera, lips parted in laughter, and in that instant I saw the ease of her posture, the way she held herself among them. There was no guilt, no hesitation. She belonged here, in a way I never had, part of a tapestry stitched long before I arrived. I felt like a ghost watching strangers fuel their joy on my goodwill. The phone buzzed again, Dev texting. "Hey man, what's up? Kelsey said you stayed back to prep at home." I stared at the message, thumb hovering over the keyboard. He believed her. He believed I was resting. My chest tightened further. I texted back, "Really?" and hit send. Dev's reply came quickly. "Yeah. She said you were exhausted and didn't feel like driving. All good though. They loved the grill." I tossed the phone onto the side table. The couch beckoned, but I resisted. Anger simmered beneath the surface, but beneath that sat a deeper ache, betrayal, plain as day. I envisioned confronting her parents, seeing the look on their faces when they realized they'd lied to me. I envisioned Kelsey's sheepish apology, if any. Most of all, I envisioned Leanne explaining herself, trying to untangle her words. I exhaled, a long, slow release, and crouched to scratch Tucker behind the ears. He licked my hand, unfazed by human politics. He trusted me unconditionally. His steady gaze reminded me there was life beyond this smoke and mirrors performance. I needed to reclaim my footing. I picked up the phone again and ended the live stream. The screen went black, and I pocketed it. Silence enveloped the room, broken only by the soft hum of the refrigerator. The air smelled faintly of charred wood and cold beer. I closed my eyes and let the soundscape settle before moving. No rash decisions. No dramatic proclamations tonight. I needed a plan. I needed clarity. I stood, walked to the kitchen, and filled 2 bowls with dry kibble for Tucker. He ate with gusto, oblivious to emotional fireworks. I washed my hands, stared at my reflection in the stainless steel sink, and barely recognized the man staring back. Eyes rimmed red, jaw clenched, shoulders hunched. I was hurt, but that hurt could fuel something more potent than resentment action. I looked down at Tucker, then back at the dark window where the party raged unseen. The faint flicker of sparklers still danced in my mind's eye. And I knew one thing. I wouldn't let this lie go unanswered. I'd watch, I'd gather evidence, and I'd confront them on my terms. because they had treated my generosity as a punchline, and I was done playing the fool. I patted Tucker on the head and whispered, "Tomorrow, we find out everything." He wagged his tail as if granting his approval, and together we exited the kitchen, ready to plan our counterstrike. The night stretched before us, silent witness to a betrayal lit by live video, a betrayal I would dismantle piece by piece. Morning light sifted through the blinds in thin, golden slats, casting a striped pattern across the bedspread. My phone lay on the nightstand, its screen dark as if it had forgotten its purpose. I reached for it out of habit, bracing my elbow against the mattress and pressing the power button. A single message glowed there from Leanne. "Hey, can you send the $4,100 for the mortgage and utilities this month? Things are tight again." My chest tightened as if a fist had closed around it. I stared at the screen, thumb hovering over the notification banner. $4,100. A precise sum that spoke volumes. Exactly half our monthly housing costs, plus a little extra for the electric bill. No greeting, no love you, no explanation, just numbers on a screen. I remembered the night before, her effortless lie, her sister's live stream, the party they tossed with the very smoker I'd bought. The text felt like a dagger twist in salt. I sat up and reached for my glasses. The glare from the window caught in the lenses as I reread the message. Things are tight again. My mind raced through metaphors, tight belts, cut corners, scraped knees. But what struck me most was the blasé tone, as if she expected this to be another routine transaction we'd always conducted without question. Thousands of dollars had flowed through my accounts over the years, each payment made quietly, out of love or obligation, or more likely, a mixture of both. I ran a hand through my hair, sitting cross-legged on the edge of the mattress. Tucker's head appeared at the foot of the bed, his ears perked and his brown eyes wide with concern. He nosed my foot, nudging me to wake up, to feed him. I set the phone down and scratched behind his ear. "I'll make breakfast," I murmured, a shaky promise. In the kitchen, I planted a pot of coffee and rifled through the cabinets for cereal. I poured 2 bowls of flakes, added milk, then spooned sugar into my own. As the coffee percolated, steam curled from the mug in soft spirals. I sipped it cautiously, bitter warmth blooming in my chest. Every swallow felt like I was drinking her demand, letting it settle deep inside. I returned to the bedroom with a tray. Tucker circled in anticipation before settling onto his cushion, while I perched on the bed and balanced the tray on my knees. I glanced at the message again. My fingers trembled as I unlocked the phone and opened a reply box. My gut told me to keep quiet, to wait for her to explain herself. But another voice. Drier, firmer, urged clarity and closure. I typed 3 simple words, not anymore. No punctuation, no apology, no emotional punctuation. Hitting send felt like dropping the final curtain on a play I'd unwittingly rehearsed for years. My heart thudded as if it feared retaliation, another $4 text laced with guilt, another silent withdrawal from my checking account. Instead, the phone lay silent. I finished my cereal in companionable silence with Tucker. His tail thumped against the cushion when I scratched his flank. I refilled his bowl, then stood and stretched, trying to shake off the morning's tension. I needed to follow through. This wasn't just an emotional impulse. It was a boundary I'd finally set. No more unpaid bills, no more ghost funding a family that treated my generosity as entitlement. By noon, I was sitting at my desk in the home office, sifting through online banking statements. Month after month, I'd covered insurance, utilities, subscriptions, all labeled shared or joint. I clicked Bill Pay for the mortgage and utilities, switched to Leanne's name on several accounts, and scheduled transfers to her checking. The interface asked if I was sure I wanted to remove autopay. I didn't hesitate. With each click, I felt my resolve crystallize. There was a satisfaction in the precision, not cruelty, but economy of truth. I redirected the $4,100 to her account with a memo. Final payment. I half expected an error message, a prompt that said I couldn't do this without her consent. Instead, the green checkmark appeared, transfer scheduled. I leaned back and rubbed my face. My chest felt lighter. A dull ache persisted, but beneath it lay relief. I realized I was no longer the family bank, the default bailout for every shortfall. I was done funding illusions. I glanced at Tucker, who trotted into the office and nudged my leg. I scooped him up and carried him outside onto the small patio, where late spring wind stirred the new leaves on the potted ferns. I crouched and scratched under his chin. "We did it, buddy," I murmured. He licked my hand, offering unconditional support. In the afternoon light, I burned through emails, utility companies confirming the change of payee, insurance agencies acknowledging my removal from her policy, Netflix. Yes, she'd been on my family account. Sending a generic, "Your subscription has ended," notice. Each email was a brick removed from a wall I'd built around my own resentment. By evening, I closed the laptop. The oak desk gleamed in the lamplight. I fed Tucker his dinner and brewed a second pot of coffee, just for me this time. I settled on the back deck, wrapped a blanket around my shoulders, and watched the sky turn rose and lavender. No party lights flickered here, just the distant hum of crickets and the rustle of pinyon pines. I thought of Leanne's text again. "Things are tight." A lie dressed as explanation. The real truth was that things had been tight for me all along. Tight with unvoiced frustration, tight with the expectation that I would always pay, tight with the fear that loyalty meant endless sacrifice. Tonight, I loosened that knot. I sipped my coffee and exhaled, feeling as though I'd exhaled 7 years of burden in one deliberate breath. My phone sat silent on the table beside me. I didn't know if she would reply. Maybe she'd call. Maybe she'd text tears or rage or further demands. I didn't care. As dusk settled into night, I felt a calm determination. I'd navigated the biggest lie of my marriage by refusing to fuel it any longer. Tomorrow, I'd sort out what came next: legal separation of accounts, a final conversation, perhaps the end of something I once believed in. For now, Tucker and I sat together in the dark, the air cool on my skin, and I realized that "not anymore" had opened a door I'd been afraid even to knock on. The door to my own freedom. I sat at my desk with the afternoon sunlight warming my back, an assortment of bills and account statements spread out before me like pieces of a puzzle I'd finally decided to solve. For years, I'd been the silent provider. Paying utilities, covering insurance premiums, even footing the bill for her Spotify and grocery delivery subscriptions when Leanne insisted she'd handle it, but never quite did. Each automatic payment had been a thread woven into the tapestry of our life together, and now I was determined to unravel every single one. I took a deep breath, tapped open the first online portal, and prepared to cut the cord. Electricity wasn't negotiable. I clicked through the prompts, selecting change account holder and replacing my name with hers. A confirmation email dinged into my inbox almost immediately. "Your request is being processed." I moved on to the internet service, the same process replaying under a different digital interface. Select cancel autopay, confirm yes, and watch the system acknowledge that the account was no longer linked to me. Beneath each notification, I felt a small surge of ownership, a reclaiming of space in a relationship defined by shared resources. For once, the action felt necessary, unmoored from resentment, rooted instead in self-preservation. Next came health insurance. I'd been shouldering her premium payments ever since she left her last job, promising me she would find another role any day now. Months turned into years, and I realized how comfortable she had become with a safety net I'd stitched together. I logged into the insurance portal, navigated to beneficiaries and covered members, and clicked on her name. The option to remove dependent stared back at me. I hesitated for a moment, picturing her face when she realized she no longer had coverage under my plan. But then I remembered the cancellation notice I'd sent her, the live-streamed BBQ, her message demanding thousands in mortgage payments. I clicked remove, and the portal sighed a digital farewell. Dependent removed effective immediately. I crossed out car insurance next. Since she'd been between jobs, I'd been covering her car payments and insurance. The policy number glowed on the screen like an accusation. I opened the provider's website, found the Manage Policies section, and disabled autopay. The site asked me to confirm that I understood I'd be responsible for all future premiums. "I understand," I clicked, and the policy wheels ground to a halt on her side. I printed a PDF confirmation and placed it in a folder labeled Closed. As I moved methodically through each subscription, Netflix, Kindle Unlimited, Amazon Prime, the monthly meal kit box she'd grown fond of, I found a strange clarity in the process. There was no pleasure in punishment, only a clear-eyed determination to streamline my financial obligations and remove the anchors dragging me into someone else's reality. Each click freed up more of my own resources, both monetary and emotional. I was sanitizing my life of automatic bailouts, one service at a time. By the time evening shadows stretched across the blinds, I'd emptied more than I expected. A yoga membership she hardly used, a wine club subscription she'd forgotten to cancel, a backup streaming service she'd added last year. I even found an old gym membership that auto-renewed without her knowledge and canceled it with a single keystroke. I realized then how much I'd prioritized her convenience over my own clarity. The number of services I'd been paying for, invisible until now, felt like ballast I no longer needed to carry. I closed the laptop, leaned back in my chair, and rubbed my eyes. My skull throbbed slightly from the relentless clicking and decision-making. Tucker patted in, nosed a rectangular stack of confirmation papers, and watched me with those big, questioning eyes. I picked him up and set him on my lap, smoothing down his soft ears. "We're almost done, buddy," I murmured. He licked my hand as if offering encouragement. I gathered the printed confirmations. 3 pages for electricity, for internet, 2 for health insurance, plus 1 for each car policy, streaming service, and subscription. I placed them in 3 neatly labeled envelopes, one addressed to Leanne, one to her father, and one to her sister. Each envelope bore a short note of explanation, account closures effective immediately. Please update your records. I didn't add pleasantries or apologies. There was nothing to apologize for. These closures weren't punitive. They were necessary resets. As night fell, I walked out to the mailbox and slipped in the envelopes. The hush of the neighborhood settled around me, the distant hum of traffic, the rustle of pines in the breeze, the faint glow of porch lights. I paused by the mailbox, breathing deeply. In that moment, I felt a sense of finality, an exhale of years' worth of silent stress. The financial entanglements were fraying, and soon they would fall away entirely. Back inside, I poured a glass of whiskey, neat, and sat in the living room with Tucker at my side. I watched the amber liquid catch the low lamplight, its warmth promising some small comfort. I swirled the glass and listened to the ice click against the sides. My phone buzzed once, a forwarded confirmation from the bank that the last autopay was disabled. I looked at it without opening. The deed was done. I thought about what these closures represented. The end of unspoken assumptions, the collapse of a routine that had long since become untenable. I thought about love, not the performative kind shown off at barbecues, but the quiet respect that underpins genuine partnership. And I realized that by removing my financial footprint from her life, I wasn't punishing her. I was reclaiming my own space to heal. I drained the whiskey, set the empty glass on the coffee table, and rubbed my palms together. The rush of the day's work had worn me down, but beneath the fatigue lay something new: possibility. Without these endless bailouts, I could redirect my resources, time, money, attention, toward myself, toward Tucker, toward a future unmoored from obligations I never freely chose. I stood, stretched, and padded down the hallway to my bedroom. Tucker trotted behind me, ready to settle in for the night. I flicked off the hall light and slid into bed, the sheets cool against my skin. For the first time in years, I drifted towards sleep without worrying about which bill I'd forgotten or which account needed updating next. I'd faced each financial tether and severed it cleanly. As my eyelids fluttered shut, I felt a quiet pride smolder where frustration once burned, a small flame of freedom that would only grow brighter with time. 2 days later, I pulled onto the gravel drive at Leanne's family ranch with the windows down and the late morning breeze ruffling my hair. I hadn't called ahead. I wanted the impact of my presence to be as unannounced as their duplicitous barbecue. The sun was high, harsh even, bleaching the red dirt and turning the surrounding pines into dark green sentinels. I parked beside the long barn, under the shadow of a sagging metal awning. The ranch house sat beyond a swath of neatly mown lawn, string lights still hanging limp between the aspens. Plastic chairs lay scattered like the detritus of a festival that had exhausted itself overnight. I hesitated for a moment, gripping the steering wheel. My pulse thrummed in my ears, equal parts anticipation and dread. I unbuckled, grabbed my keys and phone, and stepped onto the porch. The boards creaked softly under my boots as I crossed the threshold. Inside, the house was quiet except for the hum of the ceiling fan and the distant drip of a faucet. My pulse rattled in my fingertips as I rounded the corner into the living room. There, on the coffee table, lay my spare laptop, its screen dark but unmistakably mine. I picked it up, traced the cracked corner with a finger, and tucked it under my arm. That's when I saw them. Kelsey lounged on the couch in cut-off jeans and a graphic tee, flipping through a glossy fashion magazine. She glanced up, blinked at me, and set the magazine aside. "Rowan?" Her voice floated across the room, inflected with surprise, as though I'd materialized from thin air. Behind her, the front door stood open like an invitation I hadn't accepted. I nodded once, stepping further inside. The scent of stale beer and faded floral air freshener hung in the air. I tucked the laptop tighter against my hip and surveyed the room. Leanne sat at the kitchen table, her back to me. She looked up and froze, her hands hovering over a stack of mail. It was the same awkward silence you feel when you walk into the wrong wedding. Everyone stops, the music cuts out, and you realize the party you thought was yours just isn't. Her father, Charles, stirred in the recliner nearby, propping himself up on one elbow. His pale eyes narrowed. "Rowan," he said with a gravelly rasp, as though my name scratched at the back of his throat. "I didn't expect you." I set the laptop on the floor, turned to face him, and met his gaze steadily. For years, I believed this place was mine by association, by marriage, by inheritance, by the barbecues I orchestrated. But standing here now, I felt the threshold sliding behind me, shutting me out of a world I'd helped build. "Just grabbing what's mine," I said quietly. My voice was flat, forged from steel. I nodded toward the laptop. "This belongs to me." Kelsey swallowed and rose, folding the magazine and laying it on the side table. "Look, Rowan," she began, shifting her weight nervously. "We're sorry you didn't get a heads up. It was a last-minute plan." I cut her off by raising one hand. I didn't want apologies. I didn't want excuses. I wanted clarity. Kelsey's eyes flicked to Leanne, who sat silent, guilt pooling behind her wide eyes. I exhaled slowly, unclenched my fist, and pointed toward the lamp table. "My Wi-Fi router's here too," I said. "And my speaker. All the stuff I bought for the barbecue." Charles grunted, leaned forward. "You could have called," he said, though it came out more like a reprimand than a reproach. I glanced at the floorboards, running through every unpaid mortgage payment, every canceled subscription I'd already enacted. My anger rose in liquid tides behind my ribs. "I didn't want to give you a chance to lie again," I replied. The words tasted bitter. "You said the party was off. You let me prep the entire thing alone at home. Then you threw it here, using my equipment and my money like I wouldn't find out." Leanne stood, smoothing the front of her blouse. "Rowan, don't." My voice cracked, betraying the emotion I'd fought so hard to contain. I turned slowly, collecting the charger cable from the ottoman, the speaker from the floor by the doorway. I held them all in my arms like trophies of betrayal. Tucker appeared at my heels, tail wagging uncertainly. He looked up at me with the same trusting eyes he'd always held, as if I'd never given him a reason to doubt. Silence stretched, broken only by the ticking of a wall clock and the distant drone of a lawnmower outside. Finally, I spoke. "Enjoy what you've done here. But by tonight, your internet will be down. And the electricity for the smoker? That's on the pay-as-you-go meter, too. No more freebies." Charles rubbed his jaw, his Adam's apple bobbing. "You're serious?" I met his gaze. "Deadly." I picked up the speaker and the router. Tucker nudged my hand, as if offering to carry one himself. I gave him a half-smile and kissed the top of his head. Then I stepped back through the front door, the late afternoon sun dazzling me, as if to purify the moment. Outside, I paused at the old stone fountain by the porch steps, a fixture long before my time at the ranch. Water trickled from a carved lion's head, pooling in the basin, oblivious to human drama. I placed the broken arc of cash and electronics on the edge. "Here," I said to no one. "Take your cut." I turned my back on the house, the lawns, the empty chairs. Leanne stood in the open doorway, her face a portrait of shock and regret. Charles remained inside, perhaps struggling to understand how the man who once hosted 7 summers of feasts had become a stranger in his own home. Kelsey's magazine lay discarded on the couch, a silent testament to the moment she realized decorum wasn't enough. I walked around the corner of the barn, Tucker at my heels, and climbed into my car. My limbs trembled, not from fear but from the release of years of tension. I paused before my seatbelt clicked in. I exhaled, drawing in the cooling air that smelled of cedar and sun-baked earth. Then I drove away, leaving behind the ranch and its fractured promises. By the time I reached the end of the gravel drive, the sun was dipping low, painting the sky in streaks of gold and rose. Tucker sat beside me, head resting on the console, trusting that wherever we went, we'd go together. And in that moment, I felt something I hadn't in a long time, the quiet certainty that I was no longer a placeholder in someone else's story. I was my own man again, unchained, uninvited, but finally free. That evening, I climbed into my car and closed the door with a soft click, the ranch's taillights receding behind me like a bad dream. I rolled down the driver's window and let the cool dusk air rush in, carrying the scent of pine and distant wildfire smoke. Tucker settled in the passenger seat, his head leaning against the glass as if he could watch the world slide by with his eyes. I started the engine, gripped the steering wheel, and exhaled a long, slow breath. I thought I'd feel relief by now, but instead my phone buzzed in the cup holder with a text from Kelsey. "Hey, was the phone bill paid? I can't call anyone." My jaw clenched. Of course she couldn't call. I'd cut service to every device tied to my name. The message dripped with inconvenience, a petty whine that felt oddly piercing. I tapped the reply box. Part of me wanted to explain the mountain of lies I'd unearthed, to catalog every slight and deception. But another part, cooler, sharper, urged me to keep the distance I'd fought so hard to create. Instead, I typed, "Check your mail." I hit send before I could second-guess the tone. No sooner had the message gone through than another buzz. Leanne's mother, Carol. "Internet's not working. Can you help us fix it?" Her text was casual, punctuated with a smiley face emoji that felt like salt in a wound. I swallowed hard, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. Carol had always been kind to me. At least, I'd thought so. Pouring lemonade over the grill-side coals and praising my potato salad as though it were divine intervention. Now her message read like a betrayal of her own daughter's deceit. I typed back, "Your service provider has my email on file. Reset your password." I set the phone down and stared out the windshield at the empty highway stretching ahead. The headlights of an oncoming car carved through the gathering darkness, and I felt a flicker of warmth at the thought that someone could still be moving forward, unaware of the turmoil in my world. But moments later, my phone buzzed again. 5 unread messages this time. I picked it up. Leanne herself had texted, "Are you seriously doing this? I thought you understood family." My chest tightened at the guilt trip nestled in her words. Underneath, family. I heard the unspoken. I was supposed to absorb her lies and fund her comforts without question. I pictured her laughing with everyone else at the ranch, sipping bourbon while I watched from home, believing they were too broke to travel. It felt like a betrayal sharpened to a sting. I tapped out a reply. "I do understand. I just don't tolerate lies anymore." No sooner had I sent it than another message arrived, this one from her cousin Delora. "Rowan, you're making things worse. We thought you'd understand. The party was last minute. Leanne said you were too tired. Anyway." Delora's tone was equal parts exasperation and pity, as if I were a petulant child throwing a tantrum. My teeth ground together. I reread her message twice, each word fanning the embers of my anger. She lied. I typed back. "And you believed her." I didn't add an apology. I didn't add a shred of kindness. An hour later, my phone chimed again. It was Dev, Leanne's cousin, who had briefly sympathized when I'd texted him, "Okay," after the cancellation. "Hey man, everything okay?" his message read. I felt a flash of something unexpected. A flicker of regret that I'd blocked him and the rest for daring to treat my generosity as obligation. But I steadied myself. My response was succinct. "I'm fine. Please don't contact me about this." I placed the phone on the passenger seat and locked the car doors. Tucker sniffed at the console, puzzled by my tension. I rested my forehead against the steering wheel, closed my eyes, and let the steady rhythm of my heartbeat ground me. The betrayals and excuses swirled in my mind, but beneath them lay a deeper truth. For years I had allowed myself to be the bank, the backup plan, the invisible host. Now I was neither. I had transformed from the man behind the grill into someone who demanded respect for his kindness. I started the engine and drove toward home under a sky striped with violet and deep blue. With every mile, the weight on my chest lightened. The calls and texts would keep coming. Family emergencies to fix, petty inconveniences to resolve, but I resolved right then that I would answer only on my terms. I'd already severed the autopay. I'd already reclaimed my accounts. Now I would protect my peace. Halfway home, I pulled into a small overlook on a ridge and parked. The valley below was a shadowed expanse, lights of distant homes twinkling like fireflies. I stepped out, slammed the door, and walked to the guardrail, Tucker trailing behind. I inhaled the night air. Crisp, pine-scented, free of cell service. I knelt, scratched Tucker's ears, and murmured, "You and me, pal. We're the only ones who matter now." He wagged his tail in agreement. I returned to the car and sat back down, cradling the steering wheel. My phone glowed with missed calls, unread messages lining up like soldiers awaiting orders. I stared at it for a moment, then powered it off, listening instead to the engine's quiet hum and the distant song of nocturnal creatures. By the time I reached our rental, the house was dark, except for the small porch light flickering above the door. I slipped inside, kicked off my boots, and called Tucker to the kitchen. I poured kibble into his bowl and grabbed 2 beers from the fridge, one for him, one for me. I settled on the couch and popped the tab, taking a long swallow as the cold liquid soothed my throat. I let my thoughts wander back through the day's events. Kelsey's helpless text about the phone, Carol's casual request for help, Leanne's accusatory message, Delora's attempted peacekeeping, Dev's concerned ping. Each one exposed a fragment of complicity in the family circle, relatives quick to enjoy my gifts and slow to share the truth. I realized that I'd been playing a role scripted by others, husband, host, provider, never questioning the lines I was given. But tonight, sitting in the half-light with Tucker's soft breathing beside me, I felt the stirrings of something new, authorship of my own narrative. I would decide if, when, and how I engaged with these people again. I would no longer be the understudy in my own play. I would set the boundaries, define the terms, and refuse to apologize for protecting myself. I finished my beer, set the empty bottle on the coffee table, and stood. I crossed to the window and watched the silhouette of Tucker sleeping on his cushion. My phone sat on the armrest, dark and silent. I left it there. I climbed the stairs to bed, the weight in my chest finally easing. As I slid under the covers, I felt a calm resolve settle over me. Family opinions would swirl around, voices clamoring for favors and explanations. But I had discovered the power of refusal and the clarity of distance. And as sleep claimed me, I realized that in stepping back, I had stepped forward into a life where I no longer defined myself by others' expectations or entitlement. I was Rowan Hart, husband no longer at their beck and call, and that truth was enough. I spent the first strips of morning light at my desk, the pale glow illuminating stacks of printouts and folders I'd gathered over the last week. Each sheet was a fragment of truth. Venmo transfers, bank statements, utility bills, insurance invoices, all meticulously arranged in chronological order. I traced my finger along the columns of numbers, letting the weight of every dollar spent sink in. For years, I'd made silent sacrifices, covering half the mortgage, footing countless subscription fees, paying for appliances, repairs, groceries I never ate. It ended here, in this makeshift office strewn with paperwork, forming a digital scrapbook I labeled Closure, because that was what I needed most, the story of my own generosity laid bare. No longer hidden behind polite smiles and unspoken expectations. Tucker padded up and settled at my feet, his head resting on my shoe. I glanced down and scratched behind his ears. "You ready, buddy?" I murmured. He wagged his tail, as though urging me on. I took a deep breath, closed the large folder, and tied a rubber band around it. Then I reached for 3 blank manila envelopes, each the same olive brown as the ranch's weathered barn doors. I addressed one to Leanne at our old rental, one to her father Charles at the ranch's mailing address, and one to Kelsey, care of her apartment in town. I stacked them neatly, the envelopes like waiting boats. Inside each envelope went the same contents. A cover letter printed in plain Arial font, a spreadsheet listing every transaction, date, description, amount, and a note typed in bold at the bottom. These totals reflect funds advanced on your behalf over the past 5 years. They were never loans, but they were never acknowledged. I looked at the final line, the words starker than any confrontation. There was no room for misinterpretation. The goal wasn't revenge, it was recognition. I wasn't demanding repayment, I was demanding awareness. I sealed the first envelope and felt a flutter of nerves. My hands, so steady when I'd severed autopays and ejected dependencies, trembled slightly now. This was different. This was emotional currency, to be redeemed or ignored depending on their response. I visualized Leanne opening it, the slow peel of the flap, the slip of paper unfolding onto the table, her eyes reading line after line. Would she feel guilt? Rage? Relief? Would she tear it up or forward it? I didn't know. I only knew that I needed her, and everyone else, to see the full ledger of my invisible labor. I gathered all 3 envelopes in one decisive motion and walked to the mailbox at the end of our driveway. It sat on a battered wooden post, leaning slightly, a permanent fixture on the street we once shared. I lifted the red flag, slipped in the envelopes, and let them tumble to the bottom with a soft thump. My heart pounded in my ears. With that final act, I'd sent my story out into the world. There was no turning back. That afternoon, I sat on the back deck with a notepad and pen, drafting a journal entry instead of a business letter. I wanted to capture the whirlwind of emotion swirling beneath my calm exterior, the surprising relief of accountability, the sting of betrayal, the strange pride in asserting my own worth. I wrote in longhand, every loop of the cursive letters a deliberate act of self-expression. The words came slowly, but with clarity I hadn't felt in years. By evening, my phone lit up with confirmation that the envelopes had been delivered. I stared at the notifications, delivered to recipient's mailbox. The distance between me and Leanne was measured not in miles, but in unspoken truths now resting behind her door. I considered calling her, but instead I texted only one person, Dev. FYI, you might receive something in the mail. I didn't know whether to warn him or apologize for dragging him into my fallout. His reply pinged almost instantly. Understood. Take care. That terse acknowledgement felt respectful. He'd always been the one relative who saw me as more than a provider. Late that night, my phone buzzed again, an automated reply from my own email. Your message has been received. The generic subject line lacked warmth, but I couldn't help savoring its finality. My part was done. Now the ball was in their court. Sleep eluded me, so I rose and padded to the living room. I brewed a fresh pot of coffee and poured myself a cup, pacing between the window and the sofa. Outside, the night air smelled of damp pine and distant campfires. I cradled the mug, its heat warming my fingers, and stared at the dark horizon beyond the fenced yard. For the first time in years, I felt unmoored, untethered from the role I played for so long. It was exhilarating and terrifying all at once. The next morning, I awoke to another ping in my inbox. An email from Leanne's address with the subject line, received. The body was one word. Thanks. No sign-off, no explanation, no apology. My stomach churned. Was this gratitude or dismissal? I stared at the word, imagining the corners of her mouth curving in a thin smile. I closed the message without replying. This was her opening move, and I wasn't about to chase a semblance of reconciliation on her terms. Instead, I printed the email and placed it in my closure folder under the label Correspondence. I updated my journal entry. She acknowledged receipt, but nothing more. I expected as much. At least I know she read it. I exhaled, crossing out another checkmark on my mental to-do list. Days passed without further communication from Charles or Kelsey, no calls, no texts. I pictured them sitting at their respective tables, envelopes spread out in front of them like unearthed evidence. Perhaps Charles told Leanne to ignore it. Perhaps Kelsey shrugged and recycled hers. But what mattered was that they could no longer pretend ignorance. The ledger existed now, outside my mind, outside my wallet. It existed in black and white, in their own hands. Finally, 2 weeks later, my phone buzzed with a text from Kelsey. I'm sorry. I didn't know. The words felt brittle, edged with shame. I paused before replying. I could have unleashed every hidden frustration, demanded heartfelt apologies, insisted on assurances of change. Instead, I chose brevity. I texted back, thank you. In that moment, I realized I no longer craved confrontation. What I craved was acknowledgement, and Kelsey had given me enough to begin healing. I closed the phone, rose from the couch, and walked into the kitchen. I opened the cabinet, pulled out a clean mug, and filled it with fresh coffee. Tucker followed, tail wagging, ready for our morning walk. As we stepped onto the front porch, the cool breeze lifted my spirits. The envelopes had done their work. The evidence folder, once a burden, had become a bridge between hidden resentment and emerging peace. I inhaled deeply, feeling the crisp air expand my chest. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't defined by the unpaid debts of love. I was defined by the courage to claim my own worth. And so, with Tucker at my side, I set out down the driveway, ready to write the next chapter of my life, one unencumbered by invisible ledgers, one illuminated by the quiet power of truth. I drove back into Flagstaff under a sky the color of bruised plums, the ranch receding behind me like a fading fever dream. For days, I'd wrestled with what to do with the property Leanne and I co-owned, her grandmother's gift, left in joint names with the unspoken expectation that we'd steward it together. But stewardship had become theft, a burden I'd carried alone while everyone else feasted at my expense. As the sun slipped below the horizon, I found myself outside the county courthouse, its stone facade bathed in golden lamplight and the faint hum of late-day traffic. This was where I'd sever the last tie. Inside, the carpeted hallways smelled faintly of disinfectant and printed forms. I leaned over the receptionist's counter and handed her the 3-page legal motion. Petition for partition of real property. It was my share that I claimed, the half I'd kept paying taxes on, repairing plumbing, replacing broken windows and siding after winter storms. My handwriting filled every margin with notes, dates of payments, receipts for septic repairs, invoices for fence boards. She glanced at the packet, tapped something into her computer, and said, "You'll get a hearing date in 2 weeks." I nodded, stiff-shouldered, and walked out into the cool night air. My pulse thrummed with anticipation and relief. Anticipation because I finally sought formal recognition of what had always been true. I'd done more than just lend my name. Relief because at last I was done pretending the ranch belonged to both of us equally. I slid into my car and pulled away, the engine's rumble echoing the steady beat in my chest. 2 days later, I sat across from a lawyer I'd retained with savings I'd earmarked years ago for emergencies. He leafed through the motion, nodded at the supporting documents, and laid out the options: force a sale, buy out the other half, or partition in kind, physically divide the land. I tapped my fingers on the tabletop. None felt right. A fire sale would split the profits among people who'd never contributed a cent. Buying her out meant writing another check to the family who'd lied about a barbecue. Then he said 3 words that made my chest unclench: donate your share. I looked up at him, surprised. He explained that I could transfer my half-interest to a qualified nonprofit, likely garnering a tax deduction and sparing me the bitter legal battle. My gaze drifted to the window, where streetlights glowed over silent sidewalks. In that city-lit haze, I thought of the veterans I'd seen, old men hunched at the VA clinic, younger ones with trembling hands at the American Legion Hall, men who carried burdens heavier than unpaid bills. My half of the ranch could become something more than pasture. It could be a refuge. Do it, I said before the words even fully formed in my mind. He smiled, slid a form across the desk, and called a nonprofit that housed veterans in small mountain cabins. Within minutes I'd spoken to their director, a soft-voiced woman named Sheila, who nearly wept when I offered my share. She described plans to build a retreat where veterans could reclaim calm, surrounded by pines and open sky. The very landscape I'd walked with Tucker so many times. I felt a lump in my throat. This was no grand gesture, it was simple justice. A week later, I signed the deed transfer at the county recorder's office. The notary stamped and sealed the documents. My name slipped off the title like a shadow at dawn. I walked out into the cold mountain air feeling lighter than I had in years. In my pocket lay a copy of the recorded deed, the nonprofit's acceptance letter, and a small gift from Sheila. A wooden token carved with a pine tree and the words "Homecoming." I slipped it into my wallet as a reminder. Out of loss could bloom something that mattered. That evening, my phone pinged with an incoming call, Leanne's number. My stomach clenched. I stared at the screen and pressed accept, bracing for the storm I'd been avoiding. Her voice erupted immediately, raw with fury. "You gave away Grandma's ranch? Do you know what you've done?" I closed my eyes against her words. I'd rehearsed this moment, that much was true, but nothing prepared me for the anger in her tone, like the crash of a door slamming. I pictured her pacing the empty living room at the rental, fist clenched, heart racing. My pulse steadied. "I paid for half its upkeep for 5 years, I said evenly. "It never felt like ours, just a line item I covered to keep the peace." She snorted. "You're childish. You'll regret this." "Maybe," I acknowledged. "Or maybe they'll thank me." Her shriek rattled through the line. "Julian was more of a man than you'll ever be." I heard the name of Leanne's ex-husband strike the air like an insult wrapped in a dare. For a fleeting second, I wanted to retaliate, to remind her he hadn't paid the mortgage, hadn't bought the smoker, hadn't cleaned up the septic. But I let the silence stretch instead. Finally, she gasped, "How could you?" and hung up. I stared at the black screen, heart fluttering, then pocketed the phone. Outside my window, Flagstaff city lights shimmered, and beyond them the dark silhouette of the San Francisco peaks loomed against an indigo sky. I stepped onto the balcony, cradling a mug of tea. Tucker padded to my side, nuzzling my leg. I scratched behind his ear and inhaled the crisp night air. I realized I wasn't angry. Not anymore. The deed was done, and the ranch, once a symbol of betrayal, was now a gift for those who deserved it more. I drank the last of the tea and smiled at Tucker. We'd carved out something new from old wounds, a purpose greater than any barbecue or shared property. As I turned back inside, I felt a calm certainty. My chapter at the ranch had closed, but a new story was beginning. One where generosity was not repayment for expectation, and where the land would heal others as I had begun to heal myself. I woke before dawn, as I've done every morning since I moved into my cabin on Sedona's edge. The red rocks glowed softly through the window, and the air carried a chill that pressed against my lungs as I swung my legs over the side of the bed. Tucker patted at my feet, tail wagging a quiet rhythm, eager for our morning ritual. I slid on a sweatshirt, laced my hiking boots, and grabbed my coffee mug before stepping onto the porch. Below me, the pine needles and sandstone outcrops stretched into distance, untouched and unhurried. I inhaled deeply, feeling the tension of 7 years ease from my shoulders. I was no one's bank, no one's backup plan. I was simply Rowan Hart, maker of furniture, wanderer of canyons, companion to a loyal dog, and that was enough. Down the gravel path, Tucker led the way, nose low to the ground, sniffing every crevice of desert earth. I followed, cup in hand, sipping bitter coffee. The sun rose in a rosy sweep above the cliffs, lighting the sky in bands of soft pink and orange. In Flagstaff, I once woke to the hum of traffic and neighbors' chatter. Here, the only sounds were the whisper of wind and Tucker's gentle pant. We reached an overlook where the canyon yawned below us, and I dropped to one knee, setting the mug on a flat rock. I placed my hand on Tucker's head and murmured, "We've come a long way, buddy." He huffed a happy breath, ears pricked forward. I glanced at him and realized that everything I'd lost, the ranch, the marriage, the illusion of belonging, had cleared space for something I'd almost forgotten. Purpose driven by choice, not obligation. After our hike, I returned to the cabin and made breakfast, scrambled eggs and fresh brewed coffee, the kind that tastes of home. I arranged a seat for Tucker with a bowl of kibble and settled at my new workbench. The studio space at the back, it used to gather dust, now held progress. A half-finished coffee table sat on sawhorses, its smooth walnut surface reflecting the morning light. I picked up my plane and ran its blade along the edge, savoring the wood shaving curling away. The rhythm of the plane against grain soothed me. Each stroke was a reminder that I was crafting something real, something lasting, not just transactions or borrowed approval. The afternoon sun slanted through the window as I tightened the clamps on a bookshelf I designed. My phone lay untouched. No calls from Leanne, no demands for funds, no guilt-laden apologies. I'd set boundaries so clear that the echoes of past obligations bounced harmlessly off them. In the distance, a thunderhead gathered, promising a rare desert rain. I cracked a window and let the petrichor waft in, invigorating the air. Rain in Sedona meant growth. It meant renewal. I smiled at the coincidence. By late afternoon, I packed my tools into a leather satchel and loaded Tucker into the car. We drove to a nearby veterans retreat, the nonprofit I donated my half of the ranch to. The caretaker greeted me with warmth. She'd heard about the gift, the carved homecoming token I'd left in their hands. We inspected the cabins under construction, each designed to give veterans a quiet place to heal. I ran my fingers over the rough-hewn beams, imagining the veterans who would sit on these porches, looking out at the same red rocks that witnessed my own healing. The caretaker clasped my shoulder and thanked me, her eyes bright with gratitude. I nodded, feeling a lump in my throat. This chapter, once stained with betrayal, had become a gift to strangers who needed refuge more than I needed revenge. That evening, I drove back as dusk settled into violet. I passed by spots where tourists paused to photograph the swirling lights of sunset, but I didn't stop. I felt at home behind the wheel straight through open desert. At the cabin, I prepared a simple dinner, grilled fish and salad, and set a plate for Tucker. He nosed a piece before chomping it proudly. I laughed and poured myself a glass of red wine, swirling it before sipping. I stepped onto the deck with the glass in hand. The sky was a tapestry of stars, the Milky Way a brilliant slash across the heavens. I leaned on the railing, the cool wood solid beneath my palms, and reflected on the path that led me here. From the careful planning of barbecues to the unraveling of lies, from cold separations of shared accounts to the legal and emotional partition of property. I had walked a treacherous, lonely road, but at its end lay this moment, quiet, unclaimed, entirely my own. I raised my glass to the night. To new beginnings, I whispered. To honesty. To freedom. The desert answered with silence, and Tucker let out a contented sigh as he joined me on the deck. In the vast stillness, I realized I no longer measured my worth by the approval of others or the depth of my bank account. I measured it by the intentional life I built with my own hands, the kindness I extended to those who needed it, and the peace I found in simply being Rowan Hart. As midnight neared, I closed the door and turned off the lights, leaving only a soft glow from the bedside lamp. I slid into bed, and Tucker curled at my feet. Sleep came easily, uninvited by guilt or obligation. The last tremors of past storms had settled, replaced by the steady heartbeat of contentment. I was just Rowan now, and that was finally enough.